Hey everyone, here we are. We reached the tail end of our summer, and bravo to all of you, especially the parents here with young children. You did it! You managed the summer without Wonderland, without CNE, and without even Centerville. Our family, we've spent most of the summer on two wheels, and we've been doing weekend getaways and bike excursions. And I'll be away for the next 2 Sundays. And while I'm away, I've chosen to do a 2-part mini-series on one of the wisdom books, the book of Ecclesiastes. So for the next 2 weeks, we're going to explore a simple question. And the question is, what does it mean to live well? What does it mean to live well? This is an easy question to ask, but it's not such an easy question to answer. Because living well can mean so many things to different people. It can mean different things at different times. So many things in life affect what it means to live well. So things will affect our body, our soul, and our minds. Living well at 19 can look very different than what it means to live well at 59. So this is the question we want to answer. And one of the best places to examine this question is from wisdom literature. The books of the Bible, the wisdom books, will give us some insight into this question. So I want to look at the words of the old sage, Solomon. And today we're going to do an overview of the book. We're going to take a bird's eye view of Ecclesiastes from Solomon's perspective after he had pursued many different endeavors. And then next week, we'll be looking at one very important aspect of life, our time. How do we live well with the time that's been given to us? So today we're going to start with a broad overview, and I have 2 speakers who will be giving very short messages. The first speaker is a very young, dynamic speaker by the name of Alan Parr. And I stumbled upon Alan's YouTube channel where I discovered his great teaching. And he has a solid grasp of the scriptures, and he has very good, concise teaching. And he's being coached by one of the best, the very famous mega pastor, Dr. Tony Evans. So after we hear Alan's overview of Solomon's life and his conclusion, I'll let Dr. Ravi Zacharias close off. And he'll tell a very powerful personal story of what it means to live well with Solomon's conclusions. So enjoy this week's teaching and teachers, and I'll chime in next week. Have a great gathering this Sunday. We'll see you.
We're exploring 3 books in the Bible known as the wisdom literature: Proverbs, Ecclesiastes, and Job. And they're all asking the question, what does it mean to live well in this world?
So we've looked at Proverbs, who you could think of as a bright young teacher.
She's all about pursuing wisdom, an attribute of God that's woven into reality. And she's optimistic that if you use wisdom, you will build a successful life.
But then we come to Ecclesiastes, who's more like this sharp, middle-aged critic. And he says,
"You think using wisdom will bring you success. You'd better think again, because life here under the sun is meaningless."
And that's a phrase he uses a lot in this book.
But to understand this book, we have to realize first that we're hearing 2 voices.
So first there's the teacher, and we've been calling him the critic. He's the main voice in the book.
But he is introduced to us by another figure, the author. And he's the one who's collected the critic's words, and then at the end of the book summarizes everything and gets the final word.
So why does the author want us to hear from the critic?
Well, he wants to turn your view of the world upside down, and he's going to let the critic explore 3 really disturbing things about the world.
And we should warn you, these are pretty intense.
Yeah, so the first is the march of time, or as the critic says,
Generations come and generations go, but the earth, it's been here long before us and will be long after. No one remembers people from long ago, and all the people yet to come, they too will be forgotten by those who come after them.
So on a cosmic scale, you and I, we are just a blip. Stars are born, and then they die and form planets which orbit new stars, and those planets, they change over time and eventually burn out.
And amidst this cosmic backdrop, My entire existence is like a blink in time.
Which leads to the critic's second disturbing observation, that we are all going to die.
Humans face the same fate as the animals, death. All people, the righteous and the wicked, the good and the bad, those who offer sacrifices to God and those who do not, they all share the same destiny. All this activity and madness, then we all join the dead.
Man, this book is depressing.
And so is the final disturbing thing for the critic, and that is life's random nature.
So in Proverbs, life isn't random. There's a clear cause and effect relationship between doing the right thing and being rewarded.
But the fact is that life doesn't always work that way. The critic has observed a glitch in the system. He calls it chance, or in his words,
The race doesn't always go to the swift, or the battle to the strong, nor does food always come to the wise, or wealth to the brilliant, or favor to the educated. Time and chance happen to them all.
So his point is that you can't really control anything in life. It's just way too unpredictable.
So if I want to master life,
Then you're setting yourself up for a fall. Now, throughout the book, the critic uses a metaphor to tie together all of these disturbing ideas. Nearly 40 times he says that everything in life is hevel. It's a Hebrew word that means smoke or vapor. Like smoke, life is beautiful and mysterious.
it takes one shape, and before you know it, it takes a new shape.
And smoke looks solid, but try and grab it, it'll slip right through your fingers.
And when you're stuck in the thick of it, like fog, it's impossible to see clearly.
Now, our modern translations have lost the metaphor, and they usually translate hevel as meaningless. But if you read closely, the critic isn't saying that life has no meaning, but rather that its meaning is never clear. Like smoke, life is confusing, it's disorienting and uncontrollable.
So what are we supposed to do with all of it?
Well, surprisingly, the critic first of all acknowledges the perspective of Proverbs. He says it's a really good idea to learn wisdom and to live in the fear of the Lord.
Really? I mean, he just said that doesn't guarantee success.
But he knows it's the right thing to do. But secondly, and more often, he says that since you can't control your life, you should stop trying. Learn to hold things with an open hand, because you really only have control over one thing, and that's your attitude towards the present moment. Stop worrying, he says, and choose to enjoy a good conversation with a friend, or the sun on your face, or a good meal with people that you care about.
The simple things in life.
Yes, and both the good things and the bad, because both are rich gifts from God. And that's the surprising wisdom of Ecclesiastes.
Listening to the critic is painful and can lead you into some dark places.
And that's why the author speaks up at the end of the book. He doesn't want you to lose hope. He wants to make you humble into someone who trusts that life has meaning even when you can't make sense of it, that one day God will clear the hevel and bring his justice on all that we've done. And so he tells us that the proper response to all of this is to fear the Lord and keep his commandments.
And that's the book of Ecclesiastes. Now, there's one more voice in the Bible's wisdom literature, and that's the book of Job.
And he will bring us the final, much-needed perspective on our journey into wisdom.
Hey everyone, my name is Alan Parr. Thank you all so much for tuning into The Beat. If this is your first time here, this channel is all about helping people grow spiritually by giving them truth, training, and teaching from the Word of God. And so today, I am so excited to give you an overview of the book of Ecclesiastes. And just like we do anytime we do a book review, we want to start out by giving you the background to this book. This book was written by King Solomon, who was the son of King David, who happened to be the greatest king in the history of the nation of Israel. And scholars believe that Solomon wrote this book towards the end of his life as an older man, as he is looking back, reflecting and taking inventory of his life, and his desire is to pass this wisdom down to us. In this book, there are 5 tests or 5 experiments that Solomon went on attempting to find happiness apart from God, and I believe it's these same 5 things that we look for in this life to find happiness in. And with each test, you will see the phrase recurring again and again throughout the book: this was meaningless, this was like chasing after the wind. Experiment number 1 was to look for happiness in wisdom. In chapter 1, Solomon said, "I devoted myself to search for understanding, and explore by wisdom everything that was done under heaven. And so Solomon set out to see if he could become the wisest, most intelligent, smartest guy and gain as much wisdom as he could. He probably sat under the greatest philosophers. He probably read as many books as he could. He probably went to the greatest schools. And like many of us thinking, oh, if I could just get that master's degree or that doctoral degree, then I will be happy. But in chapter 1, verse 14, he concludes after this experiment was over, he said, this was a waste of time. This was meaningless. It was like chasing after the wind. Experiment number 2 is with wine or pleasure. Notice in chapter 2, verse 1, he says, come on, let's try pleasure. Let's look for the good things in life. So in the next few verses, he uses words like laughter, pleasure, wine, and foolish behavior. So Solomon said, I'm just going to test this out for a second just to see if I can find happiness in hanging out, partying, drinking, having pleasure, leisure. Some of us think we can find happiness in things like traveling. And over again, he continues to say, man, this was a waste of time. I'm still not happy. So after trying to find happiness in getting as much wisdom as he could, or wine, which represents a life of pleasure, he says, hey, maybe I can find happiness in my work. Chapter 2 says that he took on extra projects and built homes, planted vineyards, created reservoirs, gardens, and parks. I mean, he went out on an all-out experiment to see, is it humanly possible for me to find genuine, authentic happiness in this life through my work? Unfortunately, some of us are the same way as Solomon was. We think that if we can get that next promotion, if we can get that next raise, if we can get that next status upgrade on our jobs, then maybe then and only then will we be happy, only to realize that when we get there, we still want more and we're still not satisfied. Well, after trying wisdom, wine, and work, he says, well, you know what? Let me see if I can find happiness in wealth or possessions. Chapter 2, verse 8 says, I collected great sums of silver and gold. Now, that is putting it modest because most scholars estimate Solomon's net worth to be, are you ready? $2.2 trillion. This dude was the richest man that has ever lived in the history of the world, but yet in chapter 5, he shares 4 conclusions about wealth. Conclusion number 1 is that the more you have, the more you want, which means you're never going to be satisfied with what you have. The second conclusion he makes in chapter 5 is that the more money that you have, the more that other people want to take from you. The third conclusion is that the more money that you have, the more that you have to worry about losing. And then the fourth and final conclusion that he makes in chapter 5 is that the more money that you have, the more tempting it will be to trend towards being greedy. Well, if he can't find happiness in wisdom, wine, work, and wealth, he says, hey, maybe I can find happiness in having a lot of women. Chapter 2, verse 8 says, Solomon had many beautiful concubines, and then he goes on to say, I had everything that a man could desire. We know what he's talking about here. Some people think that maybe if I get into the right relationship with someone and have as much sex and sensuality, then I will be able to find true happiness in life. Well, Solomon blew that theory completely out of the door because the Bible says that he had 700 wives and 300 concubines, which were nothing more than around-the-clock sex partners. And even in spite of having all of these women around him, he still desired more. I believe that if Solomon were here today, his message to us would be, hey, do not waste your time, money, and life trying to find happiness in all of these things because, hey, I've been there, done that, got the t-shirt, have done it to a much fuller extent than you could ever possibly dream or imagine. And I can tell you from experience that it is a waste of time, it's meaningless, and it is like chasing after the wind, and the only true happiness that you can have in this life is found in God. Question of the day, what are some other things that you think the people in this life today are searching for happiness in this world? I'd love to hear from you. Leave your comments in the comment section below. If you like this video, hit the like button, share it with your friends. Don't forget to subscribe, and I'll see you next time on The Beat.
When I was in my 20s, I was a student in Toronto, and I offered to go to Vietnam because America was at war then. I was living in Canada, but I wanted to go and work with the military chaplains, and I was invited to speak. I was only in my 20s. I was invited to speak mainly to the youth or to maybe some military bases and so on, and I went there. And I'll tell you what, some amazing things happened. I was 25, my interpreter was 17, total age of 42. We were flying by American helicopters. We were on motorbikes. I was single at that time, and I said, well, if anything happens, it happens, you know. And and thousands of men and women gave their lives to Jesus Christ. I want to tell you a couple of stories with which I close, because it's amazing how these things come to be. After these thousands came to know Christ, I left and bid my interpreter, his name is Hien Pham, goodbye. And I was sure we'd never meet again. We left. 17 years later, at 11 o'clock at night, I was speaking in Vancouver, British Columbia, and my phone rang in my hotel room. I picked it up, and the voice says, Brother Rafi. I said, Hien? He said, you recognize my voice? I said, you're the only one who ever said, Brother Rafi. I said, where are you? He said, in California. I said, what? I said, what are you doing there? He said, my MBA. I said, you're in California doing your MBA? He said, yeah. I said, what happened? He said, have you got a few minutes? I said, I've got lots of minutes. He said, after you left, Vietnam fell. I was among those arrested and accused of working for the CIA. I told them I never worked for the CIA. They said, oh yeah, your English is so good, you had to be working for them. He said, no, I would interpret for guest speakers and work for the Americans, but I never worked for the CIA. He said, they wouldn't believe me, they put me in prison. They said, nobody ever admits working for the CIA, so they put him in prison. He was in a prison camp. They wouldn't allow him to read anything in English, only in Vietnamese and French. Marx and Engels, Vietnamese and French. That's it. Marx and Engels, Vietnamese and French. Finally, he said, Brother Rafi, they pounded into my head that there was no God. And one day I said, okay, I'm going to live as if there is no God. He said, that day they assigned me to clean the latrines. He said, you've never seen a latrine. He said, you thought you saw horrible latrines when you were with me? He said, you've never seen anything like this. He said, you have to tie a cloth around your nose and mouth to clean it. And I had this bucket and mop, and I was cleaning it, and I looked into one bucket next to a toilet. And I was about to empty the paper, but I noticed there was one piece of paper in English. He said, I looked around, I just quickly washed it and put it into my pocket. He said, everybody went to sleep that night. I waited, took out that wet piece of paper, and with a flashlight, I looked on that piece of paper. On the right, it said Romans chapter 8. And I started to read. And we know that all things work together for good to them that love God and that are called according to his purpose. What shall separate us from the love of God? Shall life or death or this, principalities or powers? He said, I started crying. I said, God, today I woke up in the morning saying I will never pray to you again, and now I'm holding in my hand one verse that I needed more than anything else, that all things can work together for good to them that love God. He said, I got on my knees and begged God for forgiveness. He said, I woke up in the morning and went to the commanding officer and said, do you mind if I clean the latrines again today? He said, I picked up pages from the New Testament every day. The commander had been given a Bible. He used to tear pages out of it, use it as toilet paper, and throw it into the bin. I washed it, put it into my pocket, and had my devotions at night. He said, finally, one day, they told me they were going to release me. And I was released. I got about 51 or 52 others together, including the son or daughter of the vice president, someone. We were going to build a boat to escape, and we built a boat. Several weeks went by. One day, 4 Viet Cong came knocking on my door, Brother Rafi, and said to me, you're trying to escape, aren't you? And he said, I looked at them, plain expression, and said, no. They said, are you telling us the truth? He said, yes. You're not going to escape? No. You're telling us the truth? Yes. He said, they left. He said, I slapped my forehead and said, oh, my dear God, I've done it again. He said, I prayed a prayer that I hoped would never be answered. I said, God, forgive me, And if you want me to tell them the truth, bring them back before we escape. Hours before they were to leave, these 4 guys were back, armed to the teeth, grabbed him by the collar, rammed him against a wall. You're lying. You're trying to escape, aren't you? He said, yes, with 52 others. Are you going to kill me? They said, no, we want to go with you. He said, 4 of these Viet Cong came on the boat with us. He said, Brother Rafi, on the high seas, we were in a storm, we were to capsize, but these 4 men were the best mariners we could have wanted as skippers. They finally brought us safely to Thailand. I became a refugee there and ultimately got my papers. I'm in California now doing my MBA. We flew him to my home because he wanted me to officiate at his wedding. He'd found a beautiful young Vietnamese gal he was going to marry. And he looked at my kids across the kitchen table when they were young, and he said to them, you know, you always think you're going to manage it your own way. It never works. He said the most important thing in your life is to find that intimacy with God, and He will guide you, He will hold you, He will take you through safely in your journey as you walk hand in hand with Him. When everything comes together, then you have wonder. Then you have truth, then you have love, and you have security. That's what gives life meaning. And you'll find that only God is big enough to do that for you. God bless you, and thank you for listening to me so carefully. Thank you.